Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have the pleasure of speaking with Lee Nguyen. She has been an inspiration to me my entire career. And a couple of years ago, we were at, what was it, UXPA. And I said, hey, you should speak. And then a couple months ago, I was like, hey, Lee Nguyen, come speak. She's like, sure, I can do that. So I'm gonna open up the floor for a second and let Lee Nguyen introduce herself, and then we will go through some questions that I have. If you are joining, feel free to drop some questions in the chat, and we will try to get to those as we can, okay? All right.
Thanks, Adrienne. Yeah, it's funny because I do remember that moment where you're like, you should speak. And I'm like, what would I talk about? I don't know. But it seems like we've come up with a topic, and I have been with Discover Financial Services for 15 years, and I pretty much started the UX research practice there. So from proposing, just seeing the opportunity, proposing it, growing it, and getting it to where it is now. So it's been an exciting and a fun ride, and both good and bad out there, but I definitely enjoyed the ride and would love to share some of the experiences with everyone.
Perfect. So, Lee Nguyen, let's start with the basics. Tell me, how did you even get into UX research? Because that's not where you started.
No, not at all. I started way back when, right off the grad school in publishing. And at that point, publishing was just going through all kinds of consolidations and things. I'm like, okay, this is not my thing. But I was doing research on the internet. I'm like, hey, this is an area that I want to get into. So I found a position just from the bottom up at a nonprofit, a not-for-profit professional association, and started doing web project management and just being the web coordinator and having somebody from the outside company working on their website. And it grew into bring it all in-house and working with IT, and yeah, doing a lot of just building website or web pages. And from there, it really led to the UX research because, and usability in particular, especially since like we actually, this was before Facebook was a big thing and there were Facebook groups. And so they decided to build their own communities of practice for that professional organization. And so we basically listened to what the customers had to say, the constituents. They basically, what do our members want? So we built exactly what our members want. And then after we launched it, they're like, this is not what we wanted.
Mm-hmm.
But this is what you told us you wanted. And they're like, that's not what I really meant. So that's when you get that aha moment of, oh, it's not necessarily what they're telling you. It's really trying to understand, what do they need? And that was the other thing, is that as they were using it, they're telling us, okay, this works, this doesn't work. And we were learning from that. And that's when I started doing exploration and doing reading about usability. So Jacob Nielsen, I call him the grandfather of usability. I don't know if he appreciates that, but he doesn't know. Designing web usability. Then there was Steve Krug, who did Don't Make Me Think. And in fact, I still think I have 2 copies of it because I learned that if I ever loaned out a copy, it would not return. Really understanding like, hey, there's opportunities to make things better for the customer, and really doing it by observation, not what they tell us, but what they're doing. And we even started doing a little bit of that within the previous company I worked at, where we had annual conferences of just pulling people aside and saying, hey, can you look at this prototype for us? We weren't necessarily paying them, but they would sit down and we would watch them do things. And that was like, wow, we are learning so much from this. From that company, I went to Discover because before it was a small company, it was very homogenous. There wasn't as much opportunity to grow and influence. And moving to Discover was like, hey, we're getting at consumers and there's different people, and really having that opportunity to make a big impact. But when I got there, they had hired me to be a project manager and also do web strategy. And it's funny because I thought I was going to go into this company and there's going to be all these new exciting things. And to be honest, project management is project management, whether you're a little company or a big company. You still have the same challenges, just maybe with more people and more money. And I saw this opportunity that they weren't really doing any usability. They had one company that they had on their books, but they didn't use them. And the last time they used it was for an expert review. And I read, and that was actually a project I was assigned to. And I read the review and thought, this is really terrible. It just really wasn't doing what it should be. And it was a conversion point. And there were just some really basic things that I thought, hey, there's an opportunity here. The position I was hired in wasn't really a great fit, but it seemed like there's this opportunity here where we can really grow this. And I was having conversations with the director. I was very fortunate that I was reporting to the director because of some changes going on. And so I basically came up with a plan saying, hey, I don't think that the project management role is really going to be a good fit, but I think there's an opportunity to really grow and do something challenging by building out this practice. And I was fortunate that he was very supportive of it, and he actually had wanted to build a usability practice within the organization, but really didn't have the right people to do it. And so when I stepped up to the plate, he's like, okay, let's do it. And it took a while. You're starting from ground zero. You're going to have to continue to work on projects. So I was still working on projects while also building the usability and splitting my time between the two. And then as we grew out the usability, that's when we were like, okay, now we will shift all the project management off to other team members, and I'm going to focus purely on this. And so it was definitely taking time, doing all the, setting up all the groundwork, setting up the processes. And I was fortunate that we were in a company where we use a lot of like third-party vendors, so I didn't have to do all the work. We had money, so that meant that I could go out, hire vendors, get the expertise, learn how the process works, and also get my training. I went to a lot of conferences, learned how to code HTML, went to, Nielsen Norman Group conferences and training, went to Human Factors, and got a lot of learnings in attending these kind of conferences to kind of figure out how do we make this work for Discover. And we started the first year with 2 usability tests. And I think at the peak back in 2018, 2019, we had about 45 average a year.
Lewan, just to give everyone kind of some perspective, what year did you start building out the usability practice at Discover?
Oh, sorry, 2007. So 2006, 2007. So I started at Discover in 2006, and so really put together the proposal and the groundwork in end of 2006, and really started to enact it in 2007. So in 2007, we only did 2 usability projects, and one was a major website redesign, because back then we thought we only need it for big things. The little things, it's not that important. And plus, it's hard to find budget and to convince people like, hey, it's worth taking a little bit extra time to do this, and really convincing people that there is value in doing something and bringing small numbers of people in, because we were doing qualitative usability to really understand like what's working, what's not working, and how that's going to help them later down the path where you're reducing rework, you're reducing complaints, you're increasing conversion. There's value in what we're doing now by slowing it down a little bit now for later on.
Okay, so you said initially it was for big things. Has that changed? Are you still doing it just for big things, or has that perspective changed?
It's definitely changed. We're not doing it for everything. If you have a typo, just fix the typo. And if it's a really straightforward form and you understand the best practices, you probably don't need me in there. It's not, okay, we're going to redesign the account center, so we're going to do usability. It's really, okay, let's like look at making a payment, how do we optimize that? Or we want to roll out a new feature, how do we build that? You're looking at all aspects of it. And yeah, you have to prioritize. You can't do everything, but if there's going to be some kind of value or there's some kind of question that is going on, we're not sure this is going to work. We're not sure we're going down the right path. Then we jump in and try to help the teams out.
So tell me this. So when you started building this out, so this is 2006, 2007. A lot of companies were still like, what is usability? And y'all are building a practice. So were there any companies that you looked to for inspiration? Like, how did you know what to build?
Honestly, there weren't a lot of companies out there doing it. So it was like trial and error on my own part and trying to go to these conferences, network with people, talk to people who were either in the same boat I was or did have a more advanced practice, and picking their brains and saying, like, how do you guys do this? And so it was just spending the time to do my own digging and do research. And also I was fortunate because I was using third-party vendors who were focused just on doing like usability testing. So I can lean on them because they worked with a lot of clients and they had a process. And so I can understand, okay, how do I integrate this process into my company? How do I integrate it into the web development process or the web design process? And so I relied a lot on those vendors as well as networking just to figure it out. There was no, unfortunately, there wasn't like, oh, really? I need to be like Google or Amazon.
Yeah. Okay, so tell me this. So you get started, and I'm sure you had to learn some things along the way. So what were some of those early aha moments or oh crap moments?
Jeez. There's one of the things is really learning, not always, it sounds weird, but don't listen to them, observe them. It's really about observing them. That's where you're going to get your learnings. And because people will say a lot of things, because to be honest, they're trying to be nice. You're paying them to do something. And also, if they already have an association with the brand, they may not necessarily want to say something bad about it, but it's really sitting there and digging in. The other thing, too, that I thought was amazing was one of the first researchers I worked with. He was amazing with the awkward pause. So he would ask the question, the person would respond, and then he would go, and then there would be like 30 to 60 seconds of just pure silence. And you're like, what is he doing? This is so weird. And then suddenly the participant starts talking and then telling us all these type of things that if we hadn't had that pause, probably we would never have learned. And so it was like really understanding, how do you draw the user out, and then how do you dig in deeper too, to get those additional insights. And really, and also one of the other learnings is like, how do you counteract people who don't want to know that their baby is ugly? You have to be nice about it, but you have to face the reality. Hey, I know you spent all this time working on this, but we're going to have to find ways to make your baby prettier, or change the dress or something like that, because it's just not working.
So you actually transitioned to where I was going to go next. So a lot of this, especially when you're building an internal team and a practice, is stakeholder management. So what have you learned about managing stakeholders, and what advice would you have for the audience if they're trying to either build a practice or work within a practice in their companies?
Couple of things, especially I'm still working with new partners internally because we have a lot of different divisions and teams, and they don't always know that I exist or that we do usability. And so sometimes they're learning about things word of mouth. And one of the first things I did early on was create like a web 101 deck, web usability 101 deck, which really gave a basic high level overview of what is web usability and what it isn't. And then I also have another deck which kind of goes through, again, high level, what are things beyond usability within, UX research that we can do, and what are the goals of those things. And then also with these people, I always meet with them when they reach out. I always meet with them to try to understand, what are they trying to achieve, and is this a good fit? Because a lot of people think like, this is going to give me the answers to everything. This is going to tell me, how do I get 100% conversion? I'm like, nope, nope,
Yep.
do that. So those are some of the things that I do. I also have kind of a task list, which I can share out to people from a very high level and then in a very detailed level of what's involved and what can run parallel to what they're already working on, and where the pause point is, so we can do the usability. Because a lot of people think, oh my gosh, we have to stop for like 6 weeks and do nothing. I'm like, no, you are doing work, except for maybe that 1 week where we're doing the usability, because I expect you to show up to watch the usability. And that was the other thing, is that revelation of watching the usability. You get so many more insights than just reading a report. And for a while there, because the project managers were so busy, they weren't coming to usability, and it became a point where they're just getting reports and moving. It was great that they were taking those reports and implementing them, but I think they were losing a lot of value and insights, particularly the product owners. And so we made it mandatory and said, like, hey, if you're going to do this, you need to show up. If you're not going to show up, we're not going to run it. And that got people to pay attention. And then they actually started understanding the value. And then sometimes people be like, I'm too busy, I'll come one day. We had this one project where they got so many exciting learnings. People who said they weren't coming showed up the next day. So it was a very hot room.
I think one of my favorite things about you is how you get people together, right? It is going to, it's very clear what the expectations are. One of those things that after talking to you, you shared with me is your intake process. What do your internal clients need to know about the research before they engage with you or when they engage with you?
Basically, yeah, I've created an outline and an intake form, which basically said, okay, here's the things that you need to provide to me, which is number one, what are you trying to do? What are your goals? And not just your usability goals. What ultimately is your project supposed to do? So I can understand what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish. And then let's talk about, okay, what are the questions that you have? And then I can figure out, can I answer some of those questions, or do I need to direct you to somebody else to help you answer those questions? Or are they those simply questions that you're not going to get an answer to? You're going to just have to put it into production and see what happens, because there's people are always looking for guarantees and certainty, and you can't do that. The other thing is just really in that form, like, these are some of the basic things I need. A prototype, right? I need an interactive prototype. I'm not going to sit there and show them PDFs. And I need to be available at those times. And I need to have, they're working with the agency on board, so they're doing their job. So really letting them know, who are the players, what do they need to provide me, what are the key timelines or dates, and then just why do they need this? What are they trying to do?
So what, if any, roadblocks do you continue to run into? And let me preface the question with this. When you're embedded into an organization like that, I mentor people and they're like, I just feel like it gets easier, and it doesn't. So what are some of the blocks that you're constantly running into?
I think one of the roadblocks, because we run into all the time, is because we are a big numbers organization, right? We're financial, we deal with major volume. And here I am talking about 12 people. So it's the idea of qualitative versus quantitative. And so one of the things that always come up is like, why should I, and this is literally like high level executive, why should I listen to 12 people? And in one case, I had an SBV say, yeah, sometimes we just go out in the street and get 12 random homeless people. I'm like, no. Yeah, so that's one of the things. And so one of the things I am constantly trying to explain to people, and figured out my elevator speech, this is not about statistical significance because we are not looking at opinion. We're not looking at preferences. We're looking at behavior. So I only need a few people to figure out behavioral significance. One examples I always use is we've done renovation of our offices, and when one of the wings was being renovated, they put these heavy construction doors up. But when they got done with construction, the new doors hadn't come. And so people had moved in the office, but they still had these huge, heavy doors. And so in order to open them, you have to shove them. And one of the usability problems with that is that because it was a solid metal door, you could shove it in somebody's face. So definitely a usability problem. Do I really need to have 1,000 people walk through that door to prove that, hey, we have a bit of a usability problem with this door? No, I don't think so. And same thing, when they finally installed the permanent doors, which were glass, people were so used to the heavy doors, they still were shoving them. And guess what happened? There was a hole in the wall where the handle was. So again, do I really need 100 people to go through that door to prove that there may be some tweaking that we need to do? Sure enough, the next day, facility installed a doorstop, right? That's all they needed to do, doorstop and then patch the hole. But again, these are things that doesn't require like a whole ton of people to prove that, hey, this is something that we need to look at. This is something that we need to be concerned about. And if there are additional questions of like, how big is this issue? Yeah, we can do some sizing exercises. Is it really necessary at this point for this particular issue?
So how do you measure the success of your organization? You're doing a good job.
Part of it is just one, I now have like word of mouth referrals. So literally people are telling other people and teams that I haven't worked with about what I do, and they're coming to me and saying, we heard about this. So that I think is definitely a sign of success. The other thing is really that the teams not only are coming to us, but they're actually implementing changes. So we did an exercise, it took a long time, and thank goodness for summer interns, where we literally did go back and say, okay, out of all of these projects that we did this last year, how much of the recommendations that we provided were actually implemented? And we put some guardrails on there. Okay, we're highly regulated, so things that we can't legally do, we'll eliminate that. And then things that are out of scope, we'll eliminate that. And then let's take a look at that and see like how many did we actually implement? And it was around 80%, 85%, which tells us, hey, they're listening and they're doing what they can to make it happen. So that is definitely a sign of success, that they're actually valuing what we're providing to them and then trying to implement them. Because I know there are a lot of organizations where they do the usability and they're like, okay. And then they launch whatever they originally tested with no changes.
So thinking about how long you've been doing this, how has this space changed since you first started implementing usability at Discover?
For the most part, for the longest time, it was just about usability, right? You're getting close to the end of the design, or maybe you're in the wireframe phase and you're trying to figure out what's the right flow, really pure usability. And I think in the last few years, it's really shifted, like the idea of design thinking has come in. And then the idea that, hey, let's start looking at what the user needs are first. So really looking at it like early on. Let's do early on UX research. Let's not wait until the end and find out, hey, we've already made all these decisions along the way and had like executives pick, I want this version, and then find out, yeah, that's the version that the executive liked, but it's not the version that our customers want or need. And so really understanding what that is. And also we've done some what we call rapid experimentation, where we're working on developing something and we see, hey, the competition just came out with it. And of course, the immediate instincts of leadership is, let's copy them. And I'm like, just because they did it doesn't mean it's successful. We don't know that, and they're not going to be telling us that. So some of the things we've done is actually prototyped out their version and then prototype our version out and then throw it out there and say, hey, what makes the most sense for our customers? And sometimes it isn't what they built. You're not always good at copying your competitors. Maybe if they are the leader and they're the leader, that's something, but there's definitely opportunities, especially if it's something new, that you need to forge your own path. The other thing that we started getting into is just incorporating behavior economics and behavioral insights into kind of user research, because again, there's the optimization of making it super easy as possible for the customer, but then there's this kind of element of persuasion, right? How do I get them to choose me over somebody else? And that's where you start pulling those behavioral levers. And we've had a behavioral insights person for a few years here. And so I'm constantly dragging them into projects that I'm working on and introducing them to teams so he can start influencing them before they start designing. Because sometimes when they come to us, it's already too late. And so we can only make tweaks or adjustments. So it's just getting them through the door so they can start thinking about, so how do we make it easy as well as persuasive?
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned design thinking. So how are you using design thinking at Discover?
It's a bit, to be honest, a bit patchy. And it, again, there's pockets of people saying like they're doing design thinking, and then there are pockets who don't know anything about it. But for this, the places where they are, it really is looking at, okay, what is the need? What is the customer problem we're trying to solve? And really focusing on the customer problem as much as we can, and then building from that, and then using techniques like a design sprint to try to like suss out if this is even worth pursuing. And just really looking at it from that customer need perspective versus, unfortunately, a lot of times such and such executive told us we need to build this. And then the question is why and what for? Because we've definitely, in a few cases, built products or projects and experiences where we show it to the consumer and they're like, oh yeah, it's pretty easy. You can, and we were like, oh yeah, we can do some tweaks here. But ultimately they're like, why would I need this? I have no use for this. Or I thought it was going to be X and you give me Y. So are you going to give me X at some point? Because I don't need Y.
So one of the things that comes up a lot in my mentoring sessions is researchers get frustrated because people don't listen to them. They don't take their recommendations. So what advice would you have for those researchers who are struggling with that?
It's one, I think writing reports is really about storytelling. You have to figure out what's the story, what are you trying to convey, and what actions are you trying to get them to do. And so one of the key things that we always talk about within consumer insights is, and particularly in usability, is actionable insights. Really give them recommendations that they can action. In a lot of cases, if you just give them a slew of insights, people don't necessarily know how to fix that. We actually had a behavioral consultancy go in to our collections agency, do all this research, and then they're like, okay, here's the insight. This is what you need to do. They had no idea how to implement it, no idea. So how do I translate it to the website? How do I use this methodology or technique? So in a lot of ways, it's not dictating design so much as making recommendation of, you need to fix the labels here. You need to make sure that the user is able to find what they need to find. Just really being more concrete about what actions they need to take without actually dictating the exact action. So that's part of it. And it's definitely about storytelling. One of the things that we try to do is have an executive summary right on the top saying, okay, here's the recommendations, and we prioritize it for them. So these are the most severe things. And one of the things that I do, even though we're using outside vendors to do the research, is I'm looking at it from the business perspective. What is the most important thing for the business? I'm going to push that first. And really, again, when you're talking about recommendations, how is that going to help the business? How is that going to help the people, above you? How's that going to help the people whose team that is working on this? They have to see where that value is, because otherwise it is just another checkbox and they're like, okay, that's nice, but I don't want to do it. And unfortunately, there are times where you do get overruled. and there's nothing you can do about it because it's coming from the top. And they're like, nope, we're going to do it this way because that's what I think. And so you just have to go with it and then see what happens from there.
Yeah.
You're going to lose some battles. That's just reality.
So you work with vendors and have done a lot of research. So tell me, when you think of a good researcher, what does that look like?
I think somebody who really is a good listener and also makes people comfortable. It's funny because I look at I've worked with many researchers, and they're able to build rapport very quickly with a participant that they don't know. And they're able to, they're very patient. I personally, I have done some training for moderation, and I know it is not for me because I'm just not patient enough for that kind of stuff. And they are very patient, and they are agreeing with the customer when, everyone in the back is like, are they crazy? I can't believe that person. So really just being a good listener, really being able to observe things and focus too. And it's almost, I have a bit of a theater background, and it's almost like improv because you have to go with the flow. And that's the other thing is if you need like a script as a moderator or a researcher, you're going to struggle. You need to be able to go with the flow of the user because you don't know what path they're going to take you. Because there's definitely been projects where I thought, okay, I think I know these are going to be the issues. And then half of the time I'm right. And the other half, we go down a completely different rabbit hole and we find out, hey, what we thought was going to be an issue is not an issue. But this other thing that we thought was perfectly fine, that's the issue. And so you need to be able to pivot and say, okay, let's go down this rabbit hole and figure out where it's leading us. And how do we fix this? What's missing or what's breaking that we can fix?
You were talking about when you're working with stakeholders. I don't know what that echo is. You're working with stakeholders. A lot of times they don't know what to do with the findings. So is that built into your practice to help them now figure out how to understand the findings and the learnings and then implement them? Or is that something that gets passed down?
So I'm not really involved in the implementation, but I'm very fortunate that we also work with a lot of outside digital agencies. So they usually do know. They have the expertise. They have the web designers or the digital designers. They have the information architects. They have the people in place who know how to implement. What is challenging is when we don't have an outside agency or a team that knows how to do it. And then unfortunately, there is probably more hand-holding. But I try not to do somebody else's job. I'm not a designer. I'm not a coder. But I can point them in the right direction of these are some things that you may want to consider. Because again, there's only just one of me. And so I can't sit there and design somebody's website experience or mobile app experience.
One of the questions from the audience is around competitive analysis, and then how do you use those methodologies in your own business?
So we do a lot of competitive. In fact, we have a team that focuses on just looking at the competition, and that's across the board. So it's not just their digital assets, but direct mail, TV ads, all that kind of stuff. When it comes to the user experience area, yeah, we do look at competitors, and we try to have people look at competitors. We give them a lot of them tools that they can self-service and look at competitors' apps, look at competitors' websites, be able to see what other people are doing. There are times where we will actually go out and specifically have people say, do an unmoderated test and say, oh, go research a credit card and try to find a credit card that fits for you, and go to this site and go to that site and go to the other site. And all this is recorded, and we can sit there and do the analysis of saying, okay, what are they looking for? What's working, what's not working, and then comparing it to our own site. So we've definitely done some of that as well, specifically, so we can get the insights beyond of what are the screens, but what is that experience to those customers. One thing though, when you're doing that kind of competitive testing, is making sure that you have the right audience. Like they are in market for a credit card, because if you just have some random person, they might just be doing it for the $5.
One of the questions from the Vicky at BlackRock was asking about how do you, being that you have so many different projects, right? I'm sure some of them are related. How are you now storing that and then making it to where you can share it out later? Or in my case, when I was at AT&T and Sabre, help people connect the dots. We've done this research. We know it's here. How are you doing that today?
So I do have an archive. So there is like a research repository all the way back to 2007. And I've even created a naming convention so I can actually track what the project was, who did the research, and when it was done. And I just have unfortunately a really good memory. So I'm like, yeah, I think I did that in 2016. So I've got the folder, go in there, look for it. Okay, there it is. And that's the thing, is that's the other nice thing, is teams know to come to me a lot of times and say, hey, did we do usability on this? Or did we do some kind of UX research? And then I can pull it. But then I'm also a little bit careful that I'm not going to pull something from 2007. So that might be a little bit too dated to be of any value to anybody.
Oh, I just lost it because I saw a question come up. Hold on. Okay, so here's a question. When starting a research practice in an enterprise, whose permission do you need to get to do research? So who do you go to?
To get permission to do research?
Or
obviously you need to have whoever your leadership happens to be, whoever you report to, you need to have their buy-in and support for this. The other thing is, because we are a highly regulated company or area, we also did talk to our legal team to make sure they understand what we're doing and making sure that they're comfortable. And then obviously there are certain procedures and things that we had to follow and document, and compliance and risk and legal, those were all kind of teams that we talked to ahead of time to make sure that everything was okay. And those are the same teams that we talked to when we, and also security, info security and things like that, when we built out our own UX lab.
okay. Thinking about the organization, Leewin, where does user research sit in the broad spectrum of Discover?
That's a good question. I'm wondering that myself, because we've done a whole bunch of reorgs, so I don't even know. So technically, I believe we're part of the brand and marketing team, and that's where we sit, but we support the entire organization, whether it's our credit cards, whether it's our bank products. We have our own network. So we've done work for everybody, pretty much. So it's a little bit tricky, because technically we're part of the card organization, but we serve everyone.
Okay. I told you this question was going to come up. Somebody was going to ask your thoughts on qualitative and quantitative research and how you're using them at Discover to tell a better story.
So we mainly do qualitative. We don't do quant that often, but we do it sometimes. And one of the things that we like to do quant for is when we're doing like a redesign or something, and you have a control, and then you have the test version or the new version to see, is it really making a difference? Or even if there is an idea. So we did some things where it's, some director comes up with an idea like, hey, we should implement this. And we're like, I don't know if we should, based on just past history and what feedback we've heard from customers. So we've actually built out experiences to say, okay, here's the current experience and here's this new experience. And seeing, okay, are the completion rates better? Is that conversion rate? What's the fallout? Where they're getting stuck? And then even asking them questions like satisfaction or their perceived ease of use for doing that type of stuff. And you'll see all kinds of interesting data points. The one thing is sometimes you do the quant and then you may have to follow up the qual because you're seeing the data, but what does it mean? Why is it doing that? Like, for example, we ran a test where the completion rate was actually higher in the new version, but everyone preferred the old version. And so we, needed to dig into why. And so the thing is, we were trying to streamline it and make it fewer steps. And it wasn't the fact, the real problem was not getting rid of a step. The real problem was making sure they knew they weren't done yet. Turning it a three-step process into a two-step process, what we really need to do is make sure that people knew that step 2 was not the end. And then fix the issue. Yeah, there's definitely opportunity for quant to help support it. But I think with quant, it just doesn't give you as deep of insights. It's going to give you data and numbers, which I think helps support things. But there's also sometimes where something's completely flat. So what are you going to do?
I apologize, y'all. I should have shouted out Tony when I read his question. Tony Moreno at Citibank. Got you, Tony. Okay, got it. All right. Okay. Just extra. Okay, if anyone else has questions, feel free to drop them in there. Otherwise, I'm just going to ask Lee Nguyen a few more questions. So Lee Nguyen, thinking about just your general advice that you would give to other people on the call who are attempting to build out a research practice in their company, right? So you've done this a very long time. What advice would you have to give to them so that they could sustain like you've done?
I think it's funny. It's a mixture of being impatient as well as being patient, and also really being tenacious. To build a practice takes time, especially in big organizations. And you're going to have to spend a lot of time convincing people that what you're doing is going to really add value. So really getting those elevator speeches together, getting those pitch decks together to convince people that this is the way to go, and really being patient that it's going to take time to grow. Because like I said, the first year we did 2 projects. And then the next year we did 5 projects. It was slowly building momentum. And then at some point we tipped over and went from like 15 to 36. So you have to build the advocacy. And then once people see the value, they'll start coming to you. But you really have to be patient. And especially with organizations, there is a lot of hoop jumping. When I built the UX lab, it took me 16 months. And I think it was, I actually worked out the numbers, 55 tasks, 16 months, 16 teams, and 42 different people I had to work with to make it happen. And there were teams that I didn't even know existed at Discover that I had to talk to and work through. So you just have to be patient and just be tenacious. You have to be motivated and be a self-driver.
I remember when I was at AT&T and we were trying to build out a practice, it was like this one project that just made us, right? Up until then, everybody's like, I don't know about this thing. And then we had that one project and everybody was like, ooh. So did you have a project like that just put everybody over the top?
I don't know if we had a project like that, although one project that we had early on, sorry, my cat.
Hi, kitty.
Is the spend analyzer. I can talk about it because it's in production. That actually came out of research that we did where we were building a budget tool, and people are like, that's just stupid because you don't have my mortgage payments or my rent payments. You don't have my utility bills. I'm not paying that, and I'm not going to move them over to my credit card. But what you could do is tell me how I'm spending on my credit card. And so literally, we actually got the idea for the product from our consumers because we built something that they didn't want. And they're like, no, this is what you should be building instead. And so people were like, wow, that's cool. That listening to the customer and understanding their needs, we were able to actually build something that consumers wanted. So that was something where people are like, oh, yeah, maybe we should look into this. And sure, a lot of projects, you're not going to discover that you built the wrong project and you should be building something else. But that was something. And then also another kind of aha is when we started doing the early on research, where I basically forced people to sit in a really small room. And there was a lot of us. I think there were 16 of us crammed in this room for that was tight with 10 people. And I forced them to do things quickly. We call it rapid experimentation, where it's throw in this concept, throw it in front of 4 people, spend 2 hours changing it. So the agency was like nuts. And then throw it in front of 4 more people. And we did that and we iterated really quickly. Now that was too rapid for everybody, but still it got people to throw out ideas and ideate. And we had all the different teams and it wasn't throwing things over the wall. It was this real-time collaboration. And that got people excited. And that was the situation where, you know, we invited people and some of the senior people were like, oh, I'll come for a few hours or I'll come the first day. And then suddenly they were so excited about what we were learning that they showed up the second day. And that was like, wow, this is amazing, this kind of learning and insights we can get just by doing this really quick iteration.
So one of the questions from the audience is a really good question, and one that I hear often when you have an internal team like yours. So how do you decide what projects are ones that you keep in-house versus one that you may send out to a vendor?
Actually, we don't have an in-house team, actually. So pretty much everything is outsourced. But if we had the opportunity, because at one point we were trying to build out our team internally, some of the internal things were things that were more the early on user research that we were looking at, the kind of rapid experimentations and things like that, because a lot of those things had like secret code names. So that was something where I think if we had that internal team, that would be what they would be working on, because that's the high profile things. That's like where you need that insider information and you want to have your team fully embedded into that process, whether it's a 5-day design sprint or we are doing something like something that's a week or 3 weeks long, that you can have that team be part of it. Because while it's great to have these external teams, there is time that I have to spend to get them up to speed and give them background, because they're not experts in the financial industry and I don't expect them to, and I don't want them to be. But I do need to give them enough background so they understand what we're talking about and what we're trying to do.
You just said something I think is interesting. Why don't you want them to be experts in the financial industry? Or why is that?
Because once you start drinking the Kool-Aid, you forget what it's like outside. So, and that's the other thing too, is like, always try to have the consumer or outsider perspective. Don't drink too much of the corporate Kool-Aid, because with most of our product teams, they think their product is the best thing, right? It is the best thing since sliced bread. And the reality is that's not necessarily how your consumer looks at it. The other thing too is like, you think about things 24/7. That's your job, or at least 8 hours a day. It's your job to think about these things and the lingo, how things work. Your consumers don't, especially like in the financial area. A lot of it is just very mysterious to them. And so you need to have that kind of perspective to be able to empathize with the user and understand where they're coming from.
Yep. So that's the biggest thing. And that's why I like to focus my stakeholders. At the end of the day, whether they get it or not, that's our problem. And if they don't get it, then that means we have to go back and do something different. It's not them. You can't, unfortunately, you're not standing over their shoulder coaxing them how to get through this.
Exactly. Okay. Do you plan to knock on every door and say, hey, let me show you how to do this?
Let me help you through this credit card application.
Yeah, exactly. Let me like do this for you. Yeah.
So, of course, everyone wants to know, how has research at Discover been impacted by the pandemic,
Everything's
if at
remote.
all?
Everything's remote. We were already doing some remote research, but it's gone all remote now. So it's using Zoom, and we have a research lab which has been sitting there in the dark for over a year now, I think. So we are missing some of that collaboration. So one of the things we liked about having our lab is the back room and having different teams and different groups. Like we have the design people in there. We try to get like some of the developers sometimes, as well as the product teams in there, so they can learn things and collaborate and discuss things in real time. So that's one thing that we're missing. But everything else, we're just doing it through Zoom or WebEx or GoToMeeting and figuring it out. So you do have to maybe have a little bit of time to get the tech set up for your participants, because they're not necessarily experts and you're not looking for experts. So you just have to have people available who can help walk through how to share their screen on Zoom.
Okay, perfect. That's all the questions I have. I've asked the audience if they have any other questions. So the one last thing I will ask you, Lee-Wen, is what is one piece of advice that you would give to someone who is, is starting out or looking to create this research practice within their company?
Just be tenacious. You really don't. I think one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give you is, even when you're afraid, just do it. Just say it. You have to stare down your fears and your insecurities and just go out there, because if you don't make your presence known and you don't have your voice heard, it's not going to happen. You have to be tenacious and really keep pushing, because it's going to take time. And then you have to be willing to speak the truth to your leadership. And I know there are people who are like, hey, my leadership doesn't want to hear the truth. If that's the case, I don't know if that's the right organization for you, because you have to take the good with the bad. And good leaders understand that they have to hear the bad news as well as the good news in order to move forward.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I've been geeking about this for like 2 months. So this is awesome. I tell her that she's often to blame for my tenaciousness and ability to just say, hey, listen, this is not what we're doing. Do it or we don't, right? And that's, Lee-Wen said that's okay.
And maybe one last piece of advice: don't be afraid to offend people. Not be obnoxious, but don't be afraid to hurt their feelings and say, hey, your baby is ugly. You have to be able to speak that truth. You don't want to be like, well, you might want to do something to be like, improve it. You really have to just be out there, throw it out there, let it sink in, and try to be nice about it, but don't take the teeth out of it.
Yes. Oh, I like that. Don't take the teeth out of it. Okay. There are a couple of jobs over there on the right in the chat. I think Tony said he's willing to review. Tony at Citibank, excuse me, is willing to review some resumes. He's a great resource for anyone who is trying to get into this space, both design and research, actually. Thank you all so much for joining. We will have this video up here in the next couple of days. If you have any questions on usability sciences, I guess I never even introduced myself. I just assume people know me. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Usability Sciences. We have a team of user experience researchers. This is what we do all day. And so exploratory all the way to generative types of research. If you need a mentor, you have questions about a project, you want to get some ballpark pricing, feel free to send me a message or come to our website. Okay. Thank you all again. Have a great night. Bye.